A human warship emerged from darkness and signaled silence from every alien station. The worst was confirmed by scanners, and sirens blared. Inside command hubs, frantic orders collided with dread. The shields flared. However, cracks spread beneath unyielding fire. The warship advanced. Terror blossomed. Defenses began to fail. The moment the human warship appeared, fear gripped every corridor of the alien empire. For decades, humans had a reputation throughout the galaxy as resource poor, divided among squabbling colonies, and without the advanced technology that had characterized all the great star-faring civilizations. When small human trade ships rode the waves, they merely carried small wares and polite words, but also a belief that Earth brought no real danger. Nobody suspected that humans would ever produce one single vessel quite so powerful that it would send fleet after fleet packing. But within hours, the alien empire's dreams dissolved. Chalets along the perimeter disappeared in a warble. Patrol frigates broadcast half-coherent transmissions describing incomprehensible beams before going dark. Automated defense platforms, long thought unassailable, became glowing wrecks drifting in space. Reports described the warship neutralizing protective fields with brutal effectiveness, trashing any intent to retaliate, as if each beam was a harmless flicker of light. Now, in the Empire's heartland, leaders raced to regain control. 1,000 advisors clamored simultaneously, each stirring up a frantic scheme to arrest the human craft's progress. Others called for the firing of entire battalions of dreadnoughts to swamp with numbers one ship, no matter how advanced. Still others suggested a more devious method, baiting the warship into an armored sector crowded with star mines and energized blockade nets. But world data suggested those measures would merely defer the inevitable. The design of the human craft was invincible, and the capabilities were beyond logic. Alien tacticians studied the warship's silhouette in flickering holoprojections. Its hull emitted bizarre energy signatures that could not be detected using standard scans. Hidden nodes pumped power, driving weapons that sliced through armor like paper. Peaks at its engine configuration, cross-referenced with acceleration potential, suggested something like near-infinite acceleration. It was when some scientists made the wild guess that the humans had mastered technology from unknown ancient ruins. Others maintained that it was simply human ingenuity at work. Either explanation was as disturbing as the other. Each effort to coordinate a mass defense was met with fresh complications. Random outages closed command channels, blocked by the warships jamming. Whole subfleets staggered scat here and there, reduced to listening for ancient signals which only muddled their ranks. Even the pride of the Empire, a great ring of orbital cannons constructed to fend off multiple invasion attempts, fell silent one fumbling step at a time, blasted to incandescence by far orbital bombardment. Desperate emergency bulletins warned civilians on major worlds of an unprecedented threat rushing towards the heart of the Empire, and shock. During those 3 days, the powerful ruling council, behind locked doors, had come to face a stark truth. Their half-century-old legacy of unquestioned authority was crumbling with the possibility of catastrophic collapse. They had tamed untold star systems, crushed rebellions, and defined the cosmic order for centuries. But an unsuspected enemy had come from the fringes of no space, ready to annihilate any barrier in its path. One warship could unleash thunderous power greater than whole fleets. Those who maintained bravado believed that, if the warship swept over the frontier, the Empire's core bastions would remain firm. But desperate communications from the perimeter painted a different picture. Fortifications of ancient stations, set with the best shielding technology available to alien science, had been dispatched with little fanfare. Cloaking devices that worked so well to confuse pirates and raiders were of no use here. The impervious warship plowed through them, as if their signatures were beacon flared. Some leaders, in hushed tones, spoke of surrender. They'd never considered that they could kneel before an inferior species, but the relentless force of annihilation made them entertain unimaginable alternatives. Others murmured of ultimate doomsday devices, experimental superweapons that could wipe out entire sectors. But no one knew whether these final resort weapons would even slow the invader. The speed of this incursion did not leave much time for debate. So, as desperation mounted, The Empire's leaders assembled what fleets they could, deploying them in vulnerable defensive lines. They raced to make swift deals with smaller powers, imploring them to join the crusade with ships. Even newly conquered territories were offered if they provided new troops, a sort of limited autonomy. None was under any illusions that there was guaranteed success, but felt that they had to resist. The other option, to sit around and be methodically slaughtered, looked much worse. As these fractured strategies took form, the unstoppable warship pressed ahead. Witnesses reported it crossing light years in real time, lurching from one critical sector to the next, hurting key defenses with a grisly ease. The entire empire trembled. Armored columns that once represented the power of the state dissolved like autumn leaves in a windstorm. The unstoppable was here, and the empire's last stand was about to play out. The human crew steeled itself for the trials to come as they traversed the warship's latticework of passageways. Their craft, the culmination of years of secret work, was humanity's only chance. The few resources Earth had to spare had been poured into the construction of a vehicle so advanced that it could upset the greatest powers in the galaxy. Every system, from the enormous domed fusion reactors to the maze-like shield generators, bore the imprint of a single-minded determination of a species that wouldn't go quietly into that final night. A fearsome array of weapons had been installed by engineers. The hull bristled with experimental rail cannons, each of which could accelerate slugs to near-relativistic velocity. Pulsing plasma arrays, engineered to vaporize star-hardened plating, arched out of hidden compartments. Even the warship's missile tubes housed special munitions rumored to punch through black hole event horizons. If the calculus was right. Simultaneously, stacked shields and stealth fields ensured that ordinary scanners would detect only partial echoes, never the complete silhouette. But the heart of the warship was the spirit of its crew. They had seen entire colonies wiped out in previous wars, and they had seen Earth's efforts to negotiate crushed by the Empire's iron boot. No coalition rushed in to defend humanity. Instead, its older species ignored the newcomers or extorted tributes. At home, people had grown tired of never-ending invasions, of the constant use of war against their own people and territory, and they had promised that, if peace was impossible, then they would develop capabilities so terrifying that all necessary force would no longer be a realistic alternative. The warship was that deterrent made flesh. Every compartment vibrated with the understanding that they were not only a mission, but the future of an entire species. If they succeeded, Earth would remain safe for generations. If they went down, there would be no second wave. There were no resources on Earth to spare for a backup. This lone shot at redemption was all that mattered. As the warship tore a path through alien space, the crew's resolve swelled with righteous anger. They acknowledged the Empire's centuries of cruelty, the way it broke weaker worlds under its boot for resources. They wanted to transmit a message that no further conquests were acceptable. They were not going to be easy prey. The last confrontation with the Empire's fortress systems awaited, the outposts bristling with enough firepower to melt entire star clusters. The pilot, in the warship's control deck, scrolled through readouts from sensors showing fleets gathering at strategic points. Tactical officers plotted maneuvers to exploit weaknesses, determining a chain of vulnerable supply depots and command relays. Shut these nerve centers down quickly, and the Empire's defenses would break apart in confusion. The plan required impeccable timing and resolute bravery. Intelligence gathered by secret operatives was stored in memory banks. That data suggested that beneath the Empire's imposing figures, corruption and hubris ruled the day. Numerous units still did not have updated training. Others had subpar gear. That knowledge only made the human crew bolder. Their ship, although numbered 1,000 to 1, could capitalize on these weaknesses and crush an outdated war machine. Yet unease hung in the hallways. Everyone would remember how unstoppable the Empire had seemed when it had swept through Earth's outer colonies like a plague. A few aboard were still bearing fresh scars from those days of haste. And now, ironically, they had unstoppable power themselves. The moral burden was there, too, in that responsibility. The crew vowed to strike only military targets and avoid wanton bloodshed, hoping to demonstrate a different sort of strength. Time, however, was short. The warship's sophisticated equipment devoured massive amounts of energy, challenging the reactors. As battles dragged on, there was a danger of overload. Their navigational path had to be exact, taking out each key defense in turn and disappearing before the Empire could muster a united counteroffensive. One misstep, one lucky shot by an enemy, and the whole dream would tumble. And so the warship continued, each hour taking it closer to the Empire's heart. The last gauntlet awaited, a ring of fortress worlds known for decimating entire fleets. The crew braced themselves, correcting the calibration of their weaponry. Mankind's last hope would be on the trail of the biggest target soon, intent on breaking a cycle of oppression that extended over centuries. A violently luminous flare blustered through the speckled dark as the human warship fired its opening shot. Rail cannons belched tungsten slugs with a roar that put cosmic silence to shame. The projectiles impacted an alien dreadnought's shield bubble, sending a bright wave of light rippling along the blockade line. Observers aboard lesser vessels could only watch in stunned horror as the dreadnought's shield fell in seconds, creating molten rifts in its hull. This was the moment the Empire had long been preparing for, but their preparations fell short of what was making itself known. The defending fleet answered with a massed volley of plasma beams and homing torpedoes. Streaks of energy, glimmering trails arced into the vector from angles, swarming the warship's geometry. But a whirl of scintillating fields blossomed, warping intent and forcing most warheads wide. The few that hit caused flashes of blinding light, but the warship plowed ahead, apparently undeterred. A series of panic calls filled the alien comm channels. Crews called for new firing solutions. Order after order barked by admiral after admiral for a concentration of force. Corvettes zipped around in swarms, hoping to find a blind spot. The warship responded with shockingly accurate turret fire. Streams of smaller rail slugs shredded corvette formations, leaving a metal raining across the battlefield. Within minutes, entire segments of the blockade started to give under the warship's continuing battering. After every volley, advanced thrusters flung the intruder to a new vantage point, denying the defenders a chance to trap it. The pilot conducted a deadly dance, weaving between lethal salvos that could have consumed lesser vessels. Alien fighters swooped in, cannons firing, only to be vaporized in mid-approach. As their front lines crumbled, the Empire had sent in their capital ships in a spearhead maneuver, hoping against hope to wedge the human ship between hammering arcs of artillery. For an instant, the battlefield blazed with the white noise of raw firepower, supercharged lasers, mass driver shells, cluster missiles saturating every corridor of space. And yet the warship turned away with a kind of supernatural grace, allowing entire salvos to race harmlessly into the void. It fired in return, concentrated bolts from invisible plasma turrets carving through the flanks of capital ships. A stunned silence fell over the Empire's officers, with each new wave of defenders obliterated in the warship's relentless barrage. Hardpoints that had once been relied upon to repel entire fleets folded in cascades of molten metal. The blockade's cohesion collapsed as survivors attempted to form up around their flagship, convinced that numbers would someday entrap the intruder. But any effort at encirclement did not work. The warship's thrusters screamed, hurling it to vantage points from which it could rain fire on fleeing cruisers with impunity. A systematic pattern developed. The intruder targeted weapon clusters first, rendering ships powerless while it rained finishing blows. Time and again, the defenders were hammered from angles they had no chance to defend. Atop the roiling chaos, command stations watched as their erstwhile impervious perimeter melted away. Red icons, symbols of destroyed ships, multiplied with fearsome speed on screens. The inveterate craft had clipped by the blockade's outer ring in record time to cut through a path right into a major fortress moon widely believed to be impregnable. Confidence vanished as the bludgeoning had their way with each obstacle as if it were made of Kleenex. The crew of the warship, though, remained coolly efficient. Each kill was confirmed with stoic announcements over internal comms. Damage teams rushed to plug minor breaches from glancing hits, and gunnery officers reloaded the monstrous rail cannons with new slugs. Then the sequence repeated itself, punishing another batch of defenders without a break. They had no illusions about being granted mercy by an empire that enslaved whole worlds. As fissures rippled through the blockade, The alien commanders found themselves with no easy solution to keep their forces online. Even concentrating all weaponry on one area of the country didn't work. The warship just skipped that corridor and blasted another sector. Some admirals begged for an expedient withdrawal, but the High Command insisted on holding its ground, reluctant to lose the Empire's valued bastions so readily. And then gradually, the blockade unraveled. Stricken ships became derelict hulks. The less fortunate detonated in catastrophic breach of their power cores, sending shockwaves that only increased the bedlam. Smaller ships attempted kamikaze runs, crashing their vessels into the warship's shield bubble in last-ditch rage. None succeeded. The Unstoppable's Pelican's tufted layered shielding held, glowing with an angelic aura before flinging the wreckage away. The terminal disaster was the warship's focus on the main command carrier. A hail of rail slugs tore into its underside, igniting hangar bays full of munitions. Fireballs burned through the carrier, culminating in a blinding explosion that shook the sector. Leaderless and with their command vessel in flames, the remaining defenders at the forge lost all coordination. Ships scattered, many of them jumping at random coordinates for survival. The blockade was completed, the approach to the fortress moon wide open. From the warship's bridge, a voice solemnly declared that the route was open, and their goal, to break the front lines of the Empire, was accomplished. But deeper difficulties awaited, concealed under the fortress moon's towering weapon arrays. The unhalted surged forward, unrelenting trailblazers toward the ruthless maw of alien muscle. Survivors who had retreated from the blockade limped into orbit around the fortress moon, battered hulls glowing with residual heat. Inside the moon's heavily fortified bastions, alien generals raced to negotiate an ad hoc final stand. They had invested centuries' worth of resources into this citadel, assuring that layered shielding covered it, and colossal beam turrets loomed, and entire fleets were anchored in underground docks. If anywhere could stop the human warship dead, it was here, or so they hoped. When the unquenchable came for them, an assembly called deep beneath the moon's surface. Real-time data from the destroyed blockade was displayed on holograms. Terrified Trogs announced that conventional remedies were obsolete. The warship had adapted too well, its shields reconfiguring faster than any exploitative tactic could be predicted. Some called for the immediate deployment of the Empire's experimental doomsday satellites, which can destroy a star's core and unleash flares of devastating energy. Others said the satellites were untested and could endanger the moon itself. Time was short. From watchtowers, trembling crews watched as the warship's slow, inexorable advance continued to fall. Alarm sirens shrilled, and every turret unscabbed from hidden alcoves sent up automated drone swarms that circled the area in a viscous mass of mechanical eyes. Below deck, entire fleets powered engines as they waited for the order to launch en masse. The defenders intended to draw the intruder into a zone of crossfire that they hoped would finally overwhelm its shields. Sensors detected the warship crossing an invisible line, and a hush fell over the ranks of fortress. The moon's greatest cannons blasted in a synchronized barrage. Hungry splinters of electric blue energy arced out, each more than powerful enough to sunder lesser capital ships in one strike. Onlookers watched with bated breath, eager to see the invincible dim beneath the scorching bombardment. But the warship dodged with uncanny agility. Almost hits glint off shields, but direct hits are few and far between. Then the intruder replied with practiced precision. Lances of superheated plasma slashed out from its hull across the moon's outer turrets, turning them into molten slag. Another barrage struck the main shield projector with arcs of energy leaping across several control stations. Critical parts of the fortress malfunctioned in a series of short circuits. Inside the command bunker, the fortress leadership called for hail of missile strikes. Warheads streaked from concealed silos, filling adjacent space in a deadly storm. Those the unstoppable smite swarms of interceptors that destroyed many of them en route. A handful that got through struck the warship's shield, temporarily dimming its glow. But within seconds, the barrier glowed again. The barrage continued, with no apparent sign of crippling damage to the advancing advanced. Panic gripped the defenders. They activated an ancient failsafe embedded in the moon's crust. A ripple of gravity pulses radiated outward, aimed at scramble the warship's inertial controls. Initially, the pulses appeared to be working. The flight path of the Unstoppable wobbled, having to quickly adjust engines. For the briefest of moments, the alien generals allowed themselves hope. But the person piloting the craft compensated with quick recalibrations. The warship's sensor log showed that the ship automatically analyzed the interference pattern and then adjusted its thruster output to nullify the pulses. A heartbeat later, a volley of rail slugs crashed into the gravity array's control towers, silencing them for good. The Defender's final specialized measure had backfired. Afraid of complete destruction, the fortress commanders sent out every ship in their underground docks. 100 war frigates roared into the sky, overlapping lasers forming one last buffer. Then one by one those ships opened up to maximum fire, creating a concentrated beam that would even break through advanced shielding. The joint stream shimmered like a little sun. The warship responded by funneling power into a single, devastating emitter. 2 sharp rods of swirling violet were launched from its front end. It cleaved through the combined laser like scissors through silk, lancing across the frigate ranks. Explosions rippled in quick succession, blossoming into furious clouds of debris. Pilots who survived ducked for cover, screaming frantic messages about waves of energy they could not stop. Then the narrative took a dramatic turn. Subterranean reactors deep within the fortress moon began to overload, as desperate efforts to power up failing systems ramped up. Alarms blared in the command bunker that meltdown was near. Some officers on the scene wanted to activate the meltdown, hoping to kill the intruder in the blast. Others realized that the meltdown would obliterate their entire moon-based fortress, along with the prospects for saving the Empire's heart. An even more referred Unstoppable hammered away more and more bunkers, and chaos erupted. Cracks formed in walls of reinforced steel. What used to be menacing drone swarms lay in pieces on cratered ground. The moon's face was a wasteland riddled with smoldering craters where strongpoints had stood. In the bunker, leaders bickered among themselves, all looking for a way to salvage the situation. But their lines of communication were cut off, their backup squads destroyed. The illimitable approach foretold illimitable doom. In a last, desperate measure, the Fortress Command ordered any ship that could jump away to do so, well in advance of enemy fire. Even intact fleets soared into the sky, disregarding official procedures as they clamored to escape. They abandoned thousands of soldiers and staff on the moon's surface. The only chance any with personal don't dropped before the runaway or the Unstoppable came banging at their door. Outside, the Unrelenting surged, dogged and unflustered. Its sensors picked up the signs of meltdown, but that threat no longer mattered. The fortress's fate was decided, and the Irrefutable had better targets elsewhere, deeper inside the Empire's territory. As the humans traversed the cratered moon, they recorded the last traces of erratic flight. Another bastion had been breached. The mission of the Unstoppable went on. Abandoning the smoking fortress moon, the human warship aimed for the nerve center of the Empire. This magnificent complex of orbital colonies and planetary defenses was the beating heart of alien dominion. Multi-tiered shields overlapped in rippling bands, and daunting fleets of dreadnoughts orbited vigilantly like overseers. The most powerful of the Empire's rulers had withdrawn here, secure in the indomitable strength of their ultimate bulwark. Unstoppable was a word that humans had wrested from us. As the warship entered a jump corridor, every single sensor in the region screamed one thing: the intruder had come. Alien admirals immediately commanded their immense dreadnought-class vessels to form up on layered lines bristling with the themed capital ship's largest weapons. Planetary cannons, mounted on platforms that spun, took aim to coat space with inescapable arcs. If their fortress moon had fallen, at least they would make sure the capital was not conquered. When the first round fired, it was like a tsunami of energy. Even as portside blades raked across a million horror refractors, beam after beam met a point of infinitesimal mass, power, and volume, together forming a radiant hell capable of shredding lesser fleets. For an instant, the whole region shone like a small sun. But there the blinding floods were, and the warship was still there. Deflector was shimmering near the cusp, but advanced capacitors were better. Then, with terrifying speed, It slipped behind a dreadnought's flank, sending that barrage tearing through the Empire's own lines. Chaos exploded. Cruisers were shredded by friendly fire, and the aimless slammed nearby vessels with rail volleys. Each slug struck with deadly accuracy, ripping open reactor cores and igniting fireballs that crosslit the darkness. Eyes on the planetary surface stared in horror as their defensive fleet was unraveled from within. Strategic channels gone frantic with conflicting orders. With their strategy collapsing, sensing it, the admirals demanded a unified, coordinated counteroffensive. Battleships would gather in clusters to concentrate salvos. On each side, smaller frigates paced. Firing missile swarms alternated to strike in unison. They temporarily put the warship into evasive maneuvers. Explosions flashed around its shield and dangerously dimmed the protective glow. Perhaps victory was in reach. But the inexorable was not going to give way. It pushed its engines to full, outpacing the slow-switching battleships. Plasma turrets fired in the same phase, vaporizing salvos of missiles. Then, in a last-ditch of effort, the warship's main beam weapon flared. The thickest dreadnought was split by a near-blinding column of destructive force. Hull plates vaporized. The behemoth collapsed inward, crushing dozens of Allied vessels swept up in the shockwave. Data flooded in, and leaders on the ground shuddered. Their invulnerable armada was shattering apart. The indefensible advanced further, deeper, toward the central orbital platform where the Empire's command structure lived. This network, a massive station with innumerable corridors and cavernous docking bays, served as the brain of the Empire. If it fell, the whole network would come crashing down. The Indefatigable circled it like a predator, fending off frantic defenders. Aware of the perilous state, the nation's highest officials initiated a last resort. Defensive drones, concealed behind mesh netting throughout the station's hull, flooded out from their compartments. The thousands of metallic constructs activated, armed with unique energy lances intended to breach advanced shielding. Swarms of these drones descended on the warship in a whirling mass of metal limbs and glaring weapon ports. For a heartbeat, the Unstoppable vanished behind a wave of mechanical invaders. They were a warship, and the energy lances hammered on the shield, forcing the ship to bank sharply. Sparks leaped and played across its plating, and areas started to scorch. Others clung to the hull and drilled for weak points. Klaxons blared inside the warship's corridors. Engineers rushed to stabilize the shield. If those drones penetrated critical compartments, the Unstoppable would finally be undone. And then the humans launched their last charge. Automated turrets twirled, emitting bursts of electromagnetic pulses tuned to ruin the circuitry of the drones. Within seconds, huge swathes of the swarm went dark, drifting aimlessly. Shards of drone peppered the warship's shield, yet with every pulse, more constructs silenced. Releasing itself from the ensnaring swarm, the Indomitable fired its primary weapons into the heart of the orbital installation. A spray of slugs burst through primary power relays. Explosions reverberated through every deck. Station modules blanked out, drifting off in molten arcs. Once the Unstoppable struck the command center, the Empire's top officials were plunged into darkness, communications cut off. Great licks of flame engulfed entire docking bays, scattering melting metal into orbit. The station's power grid was crippled and planetary defenses below went dark as well, losing precious targeting data. Finally, the Invincible targeted one last beam within the station's central reactor complex. The churning light flew over emptiness and collided with Inox's vulnerable force. A brilliant explosion ripped through the platform, breaking it into pieces that sprayed debris in every direction. Ships surrounding it fled in horror, beyond any unified command. The nerve center of the Empire was obliterated, laid low by the irresistible power of a single warship. Those fleets that survived scattered into disordered flight, turning against the trajectory of the Unstoppable's gun. The humans had torn the Empire's power structure out from inside its heart. For generations, observers would tell of the last stroke, an unstoppable defiance that no empire's pride could ever repair. In the aftermath of that last blow, the battlefield was draped in billowing husks. The proud orbital platform had devolved into jagged globs of broken alloy. Shards of dreadnoughts flittered in silent arcs, the engines snuffed out. The glory of an empire, revered across so many systems, now lay in tatters. Each advanced shield, each bastion, snuffed out, a single warship's indomitable thrust reduced to smoldering detritus. On rugged planetary surfaces below, strobing lights marked the remnants of battered garrisons. Command centers were left without leaders and without clarity. The undeterred warship had ripped the Empire's hierarchy to shreds with surgical assaults on vital nodes. Without central controls, local commanders had rushed to salvage what they could. Some capitulated, their morale broken by the monstrous display of human ability. Others fled to prevent any further face-off here. Across the Empire's web of worlds, word of the stinging defeat roared with dizzying velocity. Colonies long accustomed to the Empire's iron grip felt an instant vacuum of authority. Rebellious factions took advantage to overthrow local governors. Plans for secession that had once appeared suicidal now looked inevitable. With the invincible warship therefore apparently unfettered, who will dare brandish heavy-handed decrees? Within the human craft, the crew scrambled to make repairs. Shield generators hissed under strain, and the hull bore new battle scars from close misses and the relentless assaults of drones. Medics bandaged wounds from the last offensive, each corridor filled with grim satisfaction. Their plan had worked. No immediate retaliation was coming back to Earth. This warship, this unstoppable fortress, had wiped out not just a blockade and a fortress, but also toppled the Empire's core leadership in a single unstoppable campaign. A silence fell over the survivors as they processed what to do next. Some thought the mission was accomplished. The Empire's power had been shattered. Still others cautioned that scattered fleets remained out there, with the potential of regrouping under rogue admirals. The unstoppable might be unstoppable, but it couldn't be omnipresent. The galaxy was full of species that could threaten Earth's supremacy now that the old empire was gone. Across distant star systems, watchers recoiled at the scale of the destruction. The reputation of the unstoppable warship suddenly ballooned into the stratosphere, eclipsing centuries of imperial propaganda. Speculation surged that humans had tamed ancient technology or struck deals with hidden gods. The truth, human ingenuity, shaped by grinding hardships, sounded less plausible to those who had dismissed Earth as insignificant. Freed colonies released cautious communiques, uncertain of the unstoppable, unsure if it would bring a new order. But the humans, having fought for their own freedom, had no plans to exchange one tyranny for another. And they made it clear that Earth would not determine the future of these worlds. Each planet would determine its own fate, unafraid of an empire's thundering fist. Yet the unstoppable show of force has rattled new fears throughout the galaxy. New confederations might form, creating pacts to contain the human problem. Former imperial loyalists brooded in secret redoubts, conspiring for revenge. There were rumors of advanced alien races outside the Empire's rim, raising questions about how they would respond to the first appearance of the unstoppable. For the Empire's once august elite, leafy pretenders navigated star lanes, their war fleets mangled, their crew morale in tatters. They carried tales of unkillable beams, unkillable railguns, unkillable tactics. Stories spread like gangrene, stoking a common understanding that no citadel was eternal. Uncertainty reigned. From nowhere, an unstoppable warship had erupted, rewriting the cosmic script in a single campaign. On Earth, the first hints of victory crackled through degraded communication lines. Children who had been raised under the shadow of an invasion now saw a world in which humans stood shoulder to shoulder with the galaxy's mightiest powers. They mourned the sacrifices but reveled in the warship's unstoppable victory. Memorials would be erected to honor those who fell in service of Earth shot at peace. As the Indomitable meandered through quiet wreckage, scanners sought out the remnants of enemies. None left that ventured one last blow. The alien survivors had either fled or surrendered, leaving behind only the humans. In the stillness of cosmic twilight, and in that moment of reflection, the crew realized they had ushered in a new era. The unassailable had demolished an empire. The question was what would come next. A resonant broadcast pulsed from the warship's transmitter, imploring any star system still listening that Earth was not a hungry conqueror, but one who would defend itself. The unstoppable was evidence that no tyranny would be unresisted. Readers watched these lines with acute wonder, considering how the galaxy might adjust to this new champion. With time, new allegiances and rivalries would form, inspired by the legacy of the unstoppable. The battlefield glittered with the drifting sparks, ghostly echoes of the Empire's all but extinguished power. Humanity had become an awe-filled, trembling name. As the warship eased away, fucking the sight, its presence remained in every shrapnel hull. Daring, resourcefulness, and resolve could bring the strongest citadel down. What had been unstoppable had been broken. And as the last reverberations of devastation receded, one truth overshadowed all others. The next war would be bigger still, and the world would be prepared.